Hey guys, welcome to our video series of Ask Us Anything. We're answering questions around technology, the Bible, Christianity, sexuality, culture. Pretty much nothing is off limits. So let's go. Hey Andy, welcome back for another video of our Ask Us Anything series that we're doing. I got a good question for you. Ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. This one is about what's with Jesus calling the Canaanite woman a dog in Matthew 15? What's up with that?
That is a great question. So this is an episode that's found in the Bible. It's found particularly in two locations. It's found, as you said, Matthew 15. It's also found in Mark chapter 7. And one thing that's interesting to note there is in Mark chapter 7, it's the Syrophoenician woman, and in Matthew account, it's the Canaanite woman. So the same woman.
Yep.
Matthew's just being specific and just saying, Mark's telling you where she's from, but Matthew's saying, yeah, she's Canaanite. Like that's the whole point. If you live in that area, you're a Canaanite, and so that's an important detail in the story that we want to jump into. Here's what I want to do to explain this passage is I want to just give some wisdom, some hermeneutical wisdom. And hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. How do we interpret what we're reading? This is true of us reading a science textbook, a language textbook, a novel, or the Bible. When we come to the Bible, we want to make sure that we're reading it correctly. And here's a lesson that took me far too long as a pastor to learn about reading the Bible, particularly with regards to the Gospels that we find ourselves in with this question. Many people assume when they're reading the Gospels that the Gospel writers are just writing down whatever they remembered. And that's why you'll come across these weird passages where you're like, why is Jesus cursing a fig tree type of thing? Or in this one, why is Jesus seemingly referring to this lady as a dog? And you're like, that just seems like a weird story, but I'll just move on and read on to the next one.
Right.
Okay. I want to encourage you, if you ever come across a Bible passage, you're like, that's weird, particularly in the Gospels, you should pause and think to yourself, big question mark, why? Why did they write that? Because here's the truth, here's the reality. The Gospel writers aren't writing what they remember. They're writing what they want you to remember.
That's a good
John
point.
tells us this. He says, listen, I could have written a whole lot more. Like I could have filled pages and pages of what happened, but I've told you the specifics of what you need to know as you're thinking through who this Jesus is and what he was teaching. And so that means then that when Matthew or Mark tell you about this Canaanite woman, they're doing so specifically because there's something you need to learn here about this. And so you need to then make sure you're reading that in its context. And so I call this the difference between a worm's eye view and a bird's eye view.
That's good.
So a bird's eye view wants to see the book in its totality, amongst chapters and paragraphs and sentences. Whereas a worm's eye view is like looking at, a word or a sentence. And it's like, if you do it the worm's eye way, like you're going to be confused. Nobody reads a book like that. That's just silly. You got to top down read a book. That said, what happens then when you read from that top down perspective and you see this Canaanite woman within the context, all of a sudden it makes sense. So first of all, one thing you need to realize is that the Bible doesn't have verses. That was put in later. So, and verses is kind of a weird thing. Those verses are only put in to a document to help you locate yourself in a document quickly. They're not there as though that was in the original. So you need to make sure you're reading it in its context. And what you'll find with this question is it starts all the way back in chapter 14. Back in chapter 14, we start seeing this theme of faith as Jesus feeds the 5,000. And then we see Jesus goes and walks on water. And in fact, by the way, I did a whole podcast on this question with the AC podcast.
Okay.
If you want my full answer,
where
I talk about the chapter 14 all the way into chapter 16, You'll have to go listen to that, because all we've got time for here is just the short answer.
Okay, we'll put a link below for people to check that out.
Okay, perfect. So what I do want to jump in then to is where Jesus is walking on water, and Peter's like, "Hey, Jesus, can I come out?" And Jesus like, "Sure." And then Peter comes out, and then he begins to sink. And what we read in verse 31 is, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him and says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" That is absolutely key. So it's kind of like sandwiched. Sandwich, you got this, "You of little faith." And then in chapter 15, what do we read? We read this: before the Canaanite woman. Then some Pharisees, teachers of the law, came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked him, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders and don't wash their hands before they eat?" Now, Jesus is going to respond to this. And then, so I won't read it all, but Jesus chastises the Pharisees, and which is, by the way, really funny, because when the disciples are like, "Hey, did you realize that you hurt their feelings?" He's like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I did," because Jesus is challenging them, right?
Right.
He's saying, "You keep thinking um, that 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 this is all about human rules." And he even says this in verse 9: "They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." They're just trying to do all this stuff as though that's what God's after, but God's after the heart. And so Jesus keeps telling them, it's not what's coming into you that's important, it's what's coming out of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's going on in here. And so what you have then is Peter on one hand, where we're looking at the heart, and we're seeing just a little bit of faith. And Peter's a Jew following this rabbi. But then what we see is this Canaanite woman. Now you have to understand, a Canaanite woman is not Jewish, right? She's a Canaanite who was the major enemy
Yeah.
of the Jewish people throughout the Old
Yeah.
Testament. And she's a woman, and her daughter is demon possessed. I mean, I'm talking, she is at the lowest of the low on the Jewish totem pole of like value, just rock bottom. And now, one of the things that's important to know is that Jesus does not push her away. The disciples are annoyed by her, and they're trying to push her away. So what's that trying to tell us? Well, we're starting to see Jesus teaching the disciples, and what we're seeing that's going on in their heart isn't good,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And they're going to get chastised now. Just Jesus chastises the disciples in the same way he chastises the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, because you got to remember, Matthew's telling you this. They're telling you not only when they did well, but when they totally sucked, right? When the disciples just totally get it wrong. And you see that uh, throughout the Gospels, that both the positive aspects of the disciples get told and the negative. At any rate, what we see then is this woman comes to Jesus, and she says that she wants him to heal her, uh, her daughter. And what we read is, in verse 24, he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." So this is a teaching moment. And the woman came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, help me," she said. And he replied, now notice this, he doesn't call her a dog, but this could be implied from it. But again, he's not saying you're a dog. It says, "Is it not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs?" And she responds, "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And she's saying, "Listen, I'll take whatever I can get." And then Jesus says to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." See, this is
Yeah.
one of those moments that, by the way, if you've seen that TV show, The Chosen, that's a great mini series on the life of Jesus, where they do a good job showing you the personality of Jesus,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
We often don't see the personality of Jesus, and so when we see these moments, we kind of see Jesus as like this stoic, iconic figure. It's like, "You of little faith," you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's not what's happening here. I can imagine that Jesus is kind of looking at the disciples going, Okay, the disciples are trying to push you away. Jesus is not pushing her away. And then he's saying, but I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And the disciples are like, yeah, that's right. Get out of here, Canaanite woman. Right. And she's like, but I'll take whatever I can get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's showing all this faith, and you see this, sandwiching again, where Peter tries walking on the water. It's you of little faith. We see the Pharisees, and what's coming out of the heart is all these rules and regulations, and Jesus just chastises them. And who is the one who's praised? Who's the one who gets it? It's a Canaanite woman with a demon-possessed daughter. She has great faith. See, if you're reading, you should see these two together.
Yeah.
Like the Jews would see this and be like, oh man, that would just be a spear to the heart.
Right.
Who gets it? Who's the hero? The Canaanite woman's the hero.
Yeah, and I love at the end of the story, because of her faith in Jesus, that he says to her, hey, your daughter has been set free from this demon. Like the
Right,
daughter's
right.
not
And that's
even
at the
there.
very end there. And her
Yeah.
daughter was healed at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, because of the faith that she's showing, and that would probably even expands and challenges the disciples even more, going like, just as you compare and contrast all that, just like, whoa, like even a Canaanite woman can put a faith in Jesus, and this extraordinary thing can happen, and Jesus is like,
That's right.
yes.
And so their worldview's being expanded because
Yeah.
Jesus is talking about what's coming out of the heart, and what's coming out of this Canaanite woman's heart is faith. And they're starting to realize that this isn't just for the Jews, that this is for the Gentiles. And it's important to note that Matthew tells us about Jesus, or Luke tells us about Jesus healing a centurion servant.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a Roman military leader.
Yeah.
That's the enemy. Again, it's the enemy. And Jesus praises him, saying, again, it's that moment. I've never seen such great faith. He's saying, because the centurion's like, Jesus, I know you're powerful, and you don't even need to come here. All you need to say is the word.
Yeah.
And Jesus does it.
Yeah.
And praises a centurion for his faith.
Yeah. I appreciate you. Go ahead, Andy.
It's a powerful teaching moment.
Yeah, I appreciate how you tackle that. Like on surface can be a tough question of like what is Jesus doing in this moment? But you've taken the time, and appreciate you taking the time to be able to explain it to us in that way. And you said it at the very beginning. When we come across passages like this, often enough we just skip over it because it seems too difficult to understand. But we've got to be able to ask why. It's not random. These people are writing the Gospels don't just piece things together like you explained at the top of the video, but there's intentionality behind it. And you've really been able to show us that today. And so I appreciate you being able to dive in with us again and be able to answer a tough question. And I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for watching this conversation where we answered questions in our Ask Anything series. Make sure that you're following us on social media, and if you got a question, you can head on over to the link in our profile and be able to submit your question, and you never know, maybe we'll be answering yours next. See you next time.